tonight. Our first topic is the life of Eleonora of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and mysterious women in medieval history, a queen not just once, but twice, first France, then England. She wasn't just some wife hiding in her husband's shadow. Nope. Eleonora ruled lands, led armies on crusades, and outsmarted kings with velvet gloves, from political marriages to personal rebellions, from courtly love to civil wars. Eleonora's legacy shaped European royalty for centuries. So before you get too comfy, as always, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, only if you actually like what we do. Though, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. Sometimes our stories are too exciting, and sometimes we bore you to sleep. So, it's time to turn off the lights, turn on the fan for some white noise, and dive into tonight's show. Eleonora of Aquitaine was born around 1122 in a region bursting with culture, wealth, and ambition. She wasn't born into just any noble family. She was the daughter of William X, Duke of Aquitaine, ruling a kingdom so vast it rivaled the power of the French crown itself. One day, her inheritance would stretch from the Loire River all the way to the Pyrenees, making her the hottest bride in the Christian world. But what really set Eleonora apart wasn't just her land, it was her brains. Growing up in the opulent palace of Poitiers, Eleonora soaked up poetry, philosophy, and politics. Unlike most girls her age, she got a serious education. She read Latin, understood classical texts, and was a whiz at music, law, and the fine art of strategic diplomacy. Her later court became famous for inventing and spreading the ideals of chivalry and romantic love, but even as a teenager, Eleonora had way more charm and class than most. She was being groomed to lead. Everything changed in 1137. Her dad, while on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, suddenly got sick and died. Eleonora, just 15 years old, became the Duchess of Aquitaine, ruling nearly a third of what we now call France. But a young woman in charge of one of Europe's richest lands couldn't stay single for long. Her guardians didn't waste time. Just a few months later, she married Louis, heir to the French throne. This was a political power move to bring Aquitaine under royal control. Days after the wedding, King Louis VI died, and Eleonora became Queen of France alongside her new husband, Louis VII. But Eleonora wasn't your typical passive queen. From the moment she set foot in Paris, her bold spirit clashed with the gloomy court vibe. Louis was devout, refined, but inexperienced. Eleonora was lively, ambitious, and didn't hold back. Their tension sparked immediately and only got worse over time. Still, Eleonora put herself right in the power center, in a kingdom where queens were expected to pop out heirs and keep quiet. She was setting the stage for something totally different, a life that flipped tradition on its head, challenged monarchy, and shaped Europe's future. In 1147, a huge event shook the Christian world, the launch of the Second Crusade. Eastern cities had fallen, and the Pope called on European kings to take up the cross. Louis VI, devout and eager to prove himself, answered the call. But what shocked the continent wasn't just his participation. His queen, Eleonora of Aquitaine, was going with him. This wasn't just a symbolic trip. Eleonora brought hundreds of knights and vassals from Aquitaine, fully backing the campaign. And here's the kicker: she personally led a group of armored noblewomen, riding horses alongside the men. The chronicler, some Gascon guy, accused, totally different. A life that flipped tradition upside down, challenged monarchy, and shaped Europe's future. In 1147, a big event shook the Christian world, the launch of the Second Crusade. Eastern cities had fallen, and the Pope called on Europe's kings to carry the cross. Louis XVI, a devout guy eager to prove himself, answered the call. But what shocked the whole continent wasn't just his involvement. His queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was coming along too. This wasn't just a symbolic cameo. Eleanor brought hundreds of knights and vassals from Aquitaine, fully backing their crusade. And get this, she personally led a squad of armored noblewomen, riding horses right alongside the men. The chronicler, some Gascon dude, accused her of playing Amazon, turning a holy war into a fancy parade. But Eleanor didn't bat an eye. The journey was exhausting. The army marched through France, Germany, Hungary, and finally into the rugged terrain of Asia Minor. Scorching heat and treacherous mountains killed morale. Disease spread, food ran dry. Louis, always hesitant, proved to be a lousy commander. The French forces took heavy losses in Anatolia. It was a pretty epic fail. It was a leadership disaster. And Eleanor didn't shy away from saying so. In Antioch, she took refuge with her uncle Raymond of Poitiers, a sharp and charming prince who ruled the city. Here, Eleanor finally felt at ease. But some folks talked way too much. Late-night whispers started about secret meetings and inappropriate closeness. Rumors about Eleanor and Raymond spread like wildfire, whether true or not. Louis believed it. Furious, he forced Eleanor to leave Antioch against her will. Their already tense marriage cracked beyond repair. Eleanor expected leadership, advice, even strategy. Louis expected silence and obedience. When they returned from the failed crusade, their differences were just too much. They had a daughter, but no male heir. Their personalities, values, and ambitions were worlds apart. Back in France, Eleanor pushed hard to annul the marriage. It wasn't hard. The church cited consanguinity, basically. You're too related, a classic excuse. By 1152, their marriage was over. She kept her lands, kept her title, and in just a few months, made a shocking move that changed Europe's fate. She married a young, ambitious duke named Henry of Anjou. That young duke would soon become King of England. When Eleanor of Aquitaine married Henry, Duke of Anjou, in 1152, just 8 weeks after Louis VI annulled her marriage, it was scandalous. Not just fast, but strategic. Henry was 11 years younger, bold, and on the rise. 2 years later, he became King Henry II of England, and Eleanor became queen. This new pairing wasn't just about romance, it was geopolitics. by marrying Henry. Eleanor merged her vast Aquitaine lands with the English crown, creating an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. France was now boxed in by a power with Eleanor at the center, holding lands even her new husband couldn't fully control. Together, they were a formidable team, at least at first. Eleanor bore Henry 5 sons and 3 daughters, and wielded real political power, often ruling in his absence. She moved gracefully between English and French courts, and her court in Poitiers became a beacon of art, poetry, and chivalric ideals. Here, the idea of courtly love blossomed a romantic mind game celebrating noble love and noble heartache. But even during this cultural golden age, her marriage to Henry started to sour. Henry was a tireless ruler, smart but ruthless. He could be cruel, contemptuous, and increasingly unfaithful. His legendary affair with the beautiful Rosamond Clifford pushed Eleanor, once queen of both kingdom and heart, aside. Yet Eleanor didn't back down. She stayed deep in politics and diplomacy. She arranged marriages for their kids across Europe and advised Henry on big decisions. But behind the scenes, resentment simmered. She was no longer the young duchess dazzled by power's promise. At 40, she saw her influence fading, and her husband growing more tyrannical, not just to her, but to their sons. Eleanor's life never followed the usual medieval queen script. She challenged kings, led armies, and stood tall in a man's world. But her biggest rebellion against her own husband was still to come. By the 1170s, the once fiery alliance between Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II had crumbled into bitterness and suspicion and knightly ideals. Right here, the whole courtly love idea was born a romantic mind game, celebrating noble love and noble suffering. But even as she ruled over this cultural golden age, her marriage to Henry was going south. Henry was a tireless ruler, smart but ruthless. He could be cruel, dismissive, and increasingly unfaithful. His legendary affair with the beautiful Rosamond Clifford sidelined Eleanor, once queen of both kingdom and his heart. Still, Eleanor didn't just fade away. She stayed deep in politics and diplomacy, arranging marriages across Europe for their kids and advising Henry on big decisions. But behind the scenes, bitterness simmered. She was no naive young duchess enchanted by power's promise. Now in her 40s, she saw her influence slipping, and her husband growing more tyrannical, not just to her, but to their sons too. Eleanor's life never followed the traditional medieval queen path. She challenged kings, led armies, and stood her ground in a man's world. But her biggest rebellion against her own husband was still brewing. By the 1170s, the dazzling alliance between Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II had crumbled into bitterness and suspicion. Their initial passion had turned into rivalry, and Eleanor, once the empire's jewel, now felt like a prisoner in her own court. But she wasn't a woman to accept silence or submission. If her husband disrespected her, she'd fight back with the one weapon he feared most: their sons. Henry and Eleanor raised a rowdy, ambitious brood: Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John. But Henry II clever as he was paranoid and possessive. He refused to share real power with them even after crowning young Henry co-ruler in name only. Family tensions exploded. In 1173, Eleanor made a bold, dangerous move. She encouraged her sons, especially Henry, Richard, and Geoffrey, still kids, to rebel against their dad. This was not just a family squabble, but an armed uprising backed by King Louis VII of France and other European nobles. Eleanor's influence, even in her 50s, was impressive. She rallied allies, forged letters, and raised armies against the most powerful king in Western Europe for a moment. The rebellion looked like it might actually work. Henry II got caught off guard. England and Normandy were under siege, but his response was swift and brutal. The revolt collapsed. Geoffrey surrendered. Young Henry was too weak to lead and backed down, and Richard, brave as he was, didn't have the strength to win. But the deepest betrayal Henry felt wasn't from his sons. It was from his wife, Eleanor. Trying to escape Aquitaine in disguise, was caught. She was dragged before Henry's court, stripped of power, and put under house arrest. For the next 16 years, she lived locked up, shuffled from one castle to another under constant watch. No challenges, no titles, no freedom, but Eleonora's spirit, not broken. She endured, she waited, and she watched her sons, now grown men, keep fighting their dad and each other. She knew time would tip the power scales again. Eleonora survived crusades, political exile, and 2 royal marriages, and now, quietly, she prepped for the next chapter of her life, one that could restore her power in a way nobody saw coming. In 1183, Eleonora's life took a dark turn with a shocker. Her eldest son, Henry the Young King, died after a messy rebellion while on campaign. His uprising against his dad failed, and just like that, the heir to the throne was gone. With his death came a political vacuum, and Eleonora, still under house arrest, found herself back at the center of royal game playing. Her second surviving son, Richard, bold, smart, and totally fearless, was now Henry II's new heir. But trust broken, Henry favored his youngest son, John, hoping to split the lands and keep Richard in check. But Richard had other plans. He wanted full control of Aquitaine, his mother's domain. Even locked up, Eleonora kept in touch with Richard. She fueled his ambitions and loyalty to Aquitaine. She knew his strength, charm, and popularity among the nobles. If anyone could topple Henry II, it was Richard. And in 1189, fate finally smiled on her that year. Henry II died of old age, betrayal, and illness. The Plantagenet lion, who'd ruled fiercely and kept his queen locked up for over a decade, was gone. Richard took the throne as King Richard the Lionheart of England, and his first royal act, freeing his mom, after 16 years behind bars. Eleonora of Aquitaine was finally free. She was in her late 60s, but still as determined as ever. Richard knew her worth. He made her chief advisor, handing her huge political power as he geared up for the Third Crusade. Eleonora would act as regent, ruling England in his absence. She didn't waste a second. Eleonora toured the kingdom, secured Richard's coronation, and squashed unrest. She negotiated treaties, settled disputes, and managed the realm like a seasoned king. Even more impressively, she arranged powerful marriages for her daughters and granddaughters, spreading Plantagenet bloodlines across European palaces. Eleanor wasn't just a queen, she was the heart of an empire. While her son fought in the Holy Land, Eleanor, sharp and far from old, was the one holding the kingdom together. With King Richard III's death during the Third Crusade, England fell into uncertain hands, but not powerless ones. Eleanor of Aquitaine, now in her late 60s, took charge once again, and she wasn't just filling a seat. She ruled as a true regent with all the authority and savvy decision-making of a king. It was a rocky time while Richard battled in the Holy Land. His youngest brother, John, ambitious and reckless, began scheming for the crown. He conspired with King Philip II of France, hoping to carve up Richard's lands while the real king was thousands of miles away. But Eleanor stood in his way. She moved fast, rallied nobles loyal to Richard, fortified castles, and crushed John's ambitions. Even more impressive, she was still pulling off diplomatic masterstrokes well into her 70s. One of her biggest moves was securing a crucial political marriage between her granddaughter, 70 years old. One of her top jobs was locking down a political marriage between her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, and the future King Louis VIII of France, a combo that would shake up both kingdoms big time. But trouble was always lurking. In 1192, Richard got snagged on his way back from the Crusades, captured by Duke Leopold of Austria, who held him for ransom, news that rocked Europe. His enemies smelled blood, but Eleanor wasn't about to let her son suffer, so she jumped into action. Despite all that, her age, she rode across the Alps in the dead of winter to beg for his release. She negotiated a massive ransom, rumored to be 150,000 marks, an amount that nearly bankrupted England and secured Richard's freedom. Her determination stunned the European courts. The one who saved the Lionheart wasn't some young warrior. Nope, it was his mom. When Richard returned, their bond stayed strong, but peace didn't last long. In 1199, while quelling a rebellion in Aquitaine, Richard got hit by a crossbow bolt and died from infection. Eleanor was nearly 80. She outlived most of her kids, and once again, the question of succession landed squarely on her shoulders after Richard's death and John's rise to the throne. The future of the Plantagenet dynasty rested on Eleanor, but for the Queen of Aquitaine, who'd lived through war, marriage, rebellion, and diplomacy. There was one final mission left. Richard the Lionheart was dead. His brother, John, prepping to take the crown, was nothing like his legendary sibling, unpredictable, impulsive, and deeply distrusted by many nobles. John's path to kingship was anything but guaranteed. Once again, all eyes turned to Eleanor of Aquitaine, the sharp-witted matriarch with unmatched political instincts. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for a crown. She was fighting for the dynasty's future, even before Richard died. Eleanor quietly worked to bolster alliances and protect her family's legacy. When John became king in 1199, she lent her name and presence to his cause, using her queenly clout to legitimize his rule. Though she barely trusted John, she understood the stakes. Without unity, the empire forged by her marriage, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, could crumble. But Eleanor's final task wasn't in England. It all began down south in Castile, where her granddaughter was growing up. The child, named Blanche, was the next diplomatic pawn in Eleanor's vast network. The aging queen set off at 77, crossing the dangerous mountains and lands of medieval France and Spain to fetch Blanche and bring her to the French court. There, the girl would marry the Prince of France, sealing peace between two age-old rivals. That trip wasn't just for show. It proved to the world that Eleanor, even in her twilight years, was still Europe's most powerful woman. Kings respected her, nobles followed her. She made enemies think twice before crossing her, but time caught up after securing Blanche's betrothal. Eleanor retreated to Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou, a quiet religious hideaway she'd long favored. She stepped back from politics, not because she was defeated, but because her final moves were done. She had ruled alongside kings, birthed two generations of monarchs, and shaped Europe's destiny with ink, sword, and silk. In her final years, she donned a nun's habit, but nobody confused her for ordinary. Even in contemplation, Eleanor of Aquitaine remained a sovereign spirit who wrote her own legend in a world built to keep women silent. Eleanor died on April 1st, 1204 at 82. Her death marked the end of an era not just for a queen, but for a woman who shaped the fate of two kingdoms and three generations of rulers. Few medieval folks lived that long, and even fewer matched her influence, intensity, and independence. She passed away at Fontevraud Abbey, a peaceful monastery in the Loire Valley, where she spent her last days. But this wasn't some recluse fading into shadows. Even in retirement, Eleanor was an icon. Kings and ambassadors still sought her counsel. Nobles showed. On April 1st, 1204, at the ripe old age of 82, she kicked the bucket. Her death marked the end of an era not just for a queen, but for a woman who shaped the fate of two kingdoms and three generations of rulers. Medieval folk rarely lived this long, and even fewer packed such influence, intensity, and independence like her. She died at Fontevraud Abbey, a peaceful monastery in the Loire Valley, where she spent her final years. But she wasn't some cloistered nun hiding in the shadows. Even in retirement, Eleanor was a force. Kings and ambassadors still sought her advice. Nobles bowed in respect. Her name carried weight not just in England and France, but across European courts. She was the widow of two kings, Louis VII of France and Henry II of England, mother to Richard the Lionheart and King John. She had been duchess, queen, prisoner, regent, and diplomat. She wore every title like a suit of armor. Her burial wasn't any less iconic. She was laid to rest next to Henry II and Richard I at Fontevraud Abbey. The trio forever side by side, the powerful men who shaped her life and whom she outlived. The statue on her tomb doesn't show her holding a scepter or a crown, but a book, a quiet nod to her intelligence, education, and lifelong love of learning, even in death. Eleanor refused to be remembered as just a queen. She was a thinker, a ruler, a mother, and above all, a woman who owned her own story. Across Europe, the reaction to her death was awe and respect. Chroniclers, even those who once criticized her, now praised her wisdom, strength, and grace. Yes, she was controversial, bold in love, steadfast in politics, but never forgotten, never sidelined. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just about castles she ruled or kings she crowned. It was the idea that a woman in a man's world could claim her place not by asking for permission, but by sheer force of will. She didn't beg for power. She was power, and in the medieval European tapestry, her thread runs long, shining gold and unbroken. Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy isn't just locked in stone tombs or faded scrolls. It lives in the very shape of Europe, in royal bloodlines, and in the idea of female power. She was a woman ahead of her time by centuries, and her influence didn't fade with her death. In fact, in many ways, things only started to become clear after she was gone. Through her descendants, Eleanor's blood spread across thrones all over Europe. Her daughter, Eleanor of England, became Queen of Castile. Her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, whom she personally escorted to France, would become the mother of Louis IX, aka the future St. Louis. And of course, her two sons, Richard and John, left their own legacies, though often marked by war, controversy, and legend. But beyond royal bloodlines, Eleanor reshaped the idea of what a queen could be. Before her, queens were usually silent partners, pawns in dynastic marriages. Eleanor smashed that mold. She was a landowner, political strategist, military commander, and sometimes the effective ruler of an empire. Her court in Aquitaine helped create the idea of courtly love, a cultural movement that transformed medieval literature, music, and values. Her patronage encouraged poetry and philosophy in an age ruled by war and dogma, and maybe most impressively, she achieved all this in an era when women were supposed to be obedient, silent, and invisible. Eleanor didn't just challenge the rules, she rewrote them. She dared to lead armies on crusades, defy her husband's authority, raise rebellious sons, and act as regent of a volatile kingdom. She was imprisoned for her defiance but never broken, and when the world doubted her, she endured, waited, and came back to power with grace and fire. Today, historians don't see Eleanor as a fluke, but as a turning point, as a symbol of medieval women's agency, standing tall in a male-dominated monarchy. She wasn't perfect, She could be ruthless, politically calculating, and sometimes selfish, but she never became irrelevant, never just a shadow. She was a queen who ruled with brains, charm, and grit, a mother who made kings, a duchess who shaped empires. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just live history, she made it. Centuries earlier, the Mona Lisa smiles quietly at museum visitors under soft lights. The Louvre was something totally different, a stone fortress, silent and built for defense, not display. Around 1190, King Philip II of France, worried about the English threat, ordered a sturdy fortress built along the river's edge. Back then, Paris was way smaller, and the city's western border needed guarding. What rose from the riverbank wasn't a palace or gallery, but a dense, grim, impenetrable fortress. This first castle was held up by a massive round fortress, a 30-meter tall tower wrapped in high walls, watchtowers, and a wide, dry moat. Not exactly built for looks. It was all business: cold stone, arrow slits, iron-reinforced gates. Beneath the fortress, secret tunnels and storage rooms were dug deep into the ground hallways for moving supplies, hiding soldiers, or making a sneaky escape if things got ugly. Some historians even think those tunnels might still be lurking under modern Paris. For centuries, this fortress stood like a sleeping beast, silently protecting the kingdom, but over time, its purpose faded. Paris expanded beyond those original walls. The city got safer, and kings stopped needing a garrison in the capital, so they started looking at the fortress differently. By the 1500s, it was seen as outdated, militarily useless, but full of potential. Renaissance kings with big ideas didn't want thick walls anymore. They wanted halls, galleries, gardens. The Louvre Museum, rough and ancient as it was, still stood proud by the river in the heart of Paris, close to power. Time to reinvent it. This transformation didn't happen overnight. The old fortress was slowly dismantled, reshaped, and folded into the royal plans. But the bones of that medieval beast never fully disappeared. When renovations kicked off in the late 20th century, centuries after the museum took over, workers dug up the buried base of Philip's Tower cold, gray, and remarkably intact. Today, visitors can still go down to the Louvre's basement and stand among the stones that once guarded Paris. Those silent sentries from the Dark Ages, and beneath the shiny marble and manicured quiet of the museum, the ghost of a fortress still haunts the place. By the early 16th century, feudal wars were over, and castles inside city walls were out of fashion. Kings no longer wanted to protect Paris with stone. They wanted to rule with style. Under King Francis I, the Louvre made its biggest leap from military outpost to royal power and artistic ambition hub. Francis spent time in Italy and came back, inspired by the Renaissance. He didn't just want a palace, he wanted a symbol of culture, sophistication, and modern monarchy. In 1546, he ordered parts of the medieval fortress torn down and replaced with elegant wings and decorated facades. Italian architects were invited to Paris, bringing with them a new aesthetic style with domes, columns, and symmetry. The cold fortress slowly evolved into a palace, but Francis wasn't just building walls, he was building a collection. He brought masterpieces from Italy home, including works by Leonardo da Vinci, the most famous painting, the Mona Lisa. Francis bought it straight from Da Vinci himself. Even though it wasn't displayed for centuries, the seed for the Louvre's future was quietly planted. His successors kept the momentum. Catherine de' Medici, widow of King Henry II, built the nearby Tuileries Palace and had a grand idea to link it with the Louvre. Her efforts triggered the construction of a massive palace complex stretching along the river. It became a symbol of monarchy, grand, majestic, and ever expanding. By the time of Louis XIII and Louis XIV, the Louvre was two things at once: half residence, half art center. Artists were invited to live and work there. Sculptors, painters, and architects wandered the Louvre's halls, some even sleeping under their own paintings. The Louvre wasn't just a king's home anymore. It had become a house of creativity. Yet, even as elegance overtook utility, the palace still held political power. Behind those ornate walls, plots brewed, alliances formed, and power shifted. The Louvre was no longer built to keep enemies out. Now, it was designed to dazzle them. As the Louvre grew into a splendid palace, it seemed destined to be the lasting center of royal life in France. But in the 17th century, one guy, the man changed everything. Louis XIV, the Sun King, ambitious, flashy, and totally obsessed with control. Louis saw the Louvre as a relic of compromise, too urban, too cramped, too tied to that old-school noble bloodline. He wanted something grander, purer, and all his own. So in 1682, Louis XIV packed up the court and moved to Versailles. That move was huge. Just that one decision killed the Louvre's role as the royal power hub. Those grand halls, decked out with carpets and full of courtiers, suddenly went quiet. The king was gone. The nobles followed, and the Louvre left in the capital started to lose its sparkle, but it didn't rot away. Instead, something unexpected happened. It started to open up without the royal crowd around. The Louvre became a refuge for artists and intellectuals. Even though Louis XIV was gone, he still had a soft spot for art. Let the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture set up shop in the building. Empty rooms were filled with studios and offices. Painters and sculptors worked alongside philosophers and mathematicians. The Louvre became a living lab of French creativity during this time. The Louvre's identity got way more mixed up. Wasn't a fortress, not a royal residence either. It was something in between. Here you had administrative offices and guest rooms. Sometimes things got messy, patched up with half-finished projects and renovations. But beneath the chaos, a new idea was brewing that maybe this place, once the throne room of kings, might one day belong to the people. There were whispers about turning it into a public gallery, where regular folks could actually see the treasures their taxes had helped gather. But under the monarchy, That was still just a dream. Still, the seed was planted. The Louvre, no longer dripping with royal charm, started gaining a new kind of prestige, not built on crowns and courts, but on culture and knowledge. And when political storms blew up in France, that cultural core would prove stronger than any throne. By the late 18th century, the long smoldering storm in France finally blew up. The monarchy fell, the guillotine went up, and in the chaos of revolution, centuries of royal tradition got smashed, including the idea that art was only for kings. The Louvre, once a private royal retreat, stood on the brink of change in 1793 as the French Revolution tore down the old order. The Assembly declared the Louvre the central museum of the Republic, a free public museum for all citizens. Pretty radical concept. Art that used to be hidden behind palace walls or reserved for the elite was now open to ordinary people. The first gallery opened on August 10th, the anniversary of the monarchy's fall. Nobody noticed the irony. The place where kings once hosted mistresses and threw costume parties now saw quiet crowds of people strolling through, staring at paintings of saints, gods, and emperors. But the Louvre's collection needed more than good intentions. Many masterpieces were sold off, stolen, or hidden during the revolution. So, the revolutionaries did what revolutionaries do best. They confiscated. Church property was seized. Noble collections were grabbed. Anything symbolizing privilege became a legit target. The Louvre turned into the biggest dumping ground for confiscated art. Then along came Napoleon. When he took power, the Louvre entered a bold new phase. Napoleon saw art not just as culture, but as conquest. Wherever his armies marched, treasures followed, from Rome to Venice, Egypt to Berlin. Napoleon looted paintings, statues, and antiques. He renamed the museum Musée Napoléon and stuffed it full of spoils from all over Europe. The Louvre overflowed with trophies, winged victories, Roman busts, Egyptian coffins. Art was no longer heritage, it was seized loot, and the museum, once a symbol of royal luxury, became a showcase of empire. But when Napoleon fell in 1815, the reckoning began. Many countries demanded their treasures back. Some were returned. The others mysteriously stuck around, yet the shutters were still intact. And more than that, it was reborn. No royalty, no revolution. It became something permanent, a monument not just for France, but for civilization itself. And beneath the marble floors, layers of history kept getting etched deeper. While the Louvre Museum dazzles the world above ground, down below, polished stone corridors and galleries tell a different story, one of secrets, tunnels, and whispers long forgotten by time. Few visitors know that beneath the grand facade of the museum lies a web of vendors, passageways, and forgotten cellars reflecting centuries of the building's transformation. Most of the underground space dates back to the original medieval fortress, when Philip II built the first Louvre fortress in the 12th century. It included underground storage rooms and escape tunnels carved deep into the bedrock. Some were for storing weapons and grain. Others were supposedly used for sneaky business during sieges, as the fortress became a palace and the palace a museum. These passages were expanded, sealed off, or repurposed. Some turned into wine cellars during the Renaissance. Others were bricked up and abandoned, their existence now only remembered in old blueprints and royal letters. One particularly weird architectural feature is the remnants of the original moat, now part of a basement exhibit. Visitors can walk along the cold stone edge, where the line between museum and ruins blurs. Here, the Louvre's luxurious beauty gives way to raw medieval stone crumbling, weathered, untouched by centuries of restoration. And then there are the rumors. Some say secret tunnels still hide beneath the Louvre, leftovers of royal escape routes or wartime hideouts during World's War des Coups. Documents mention certain rooms and tunnels used to stash France's art treasures away from the Nazis. Paintings were secretly moved out, but not everything could be shifted. Some relics were buried deep inside the Louvre, surrounded by stone, guarded by curators who knew every inch of the underground map. Others claim that during the Revolution, executed nobles' bodies were secretly kept in the lower levels, hidden from public eyes until they received a proper burial. No proof backs this up, but the legend still echoes within the Louvre's walls. Today, many lower floors are closed to the public. Some are used for logistics, storage, maintenance routes, and climate control, but others remain sealed off, unreachable, their secrets intact beneath the glossy surface of the windows. The past still breathes, heavy with stories never displayed in any frame. In June 1940, Paris fell to Nazi Germany. German troops marched down the city's boulevards, and swastikas flew over the Eiffel Tower. The Louvre, France's priceless jewel, stood tall in the center, vulnerable, exposed, and packed with priceless artworks. What happened behind those big doors during those dark years remains one of the most intense and mysterious chapters in the museum's long history. But the Louvre wasn't caught off guard. Even before the Nazis entered the city, French museum managers and art historians launched a secret evacuation plan. Thousands of pieces, including the Mona Lisa, the Venus de Milo, and the Winged Victory of Samothrace, were quietly packed into custom crates and shipped off to castles, monasteries, and rural estates across France. Camouflaged and escorted convoys carried the nation's soul under the cover of night. This was the biggest museum evacuation ever attempted. When Nazi officers finally inspected all across France, camouflaged, escorted convoys carried the nation's soul under the cover of darkness. This was the biggest museum evacuation ever. When Nazi officers inspected the Louvre, the galleries were eerily empty. All that was left were fake paintings, empty frames, and a wooden stick. The Nazis, angry but impressed by the scale of the operation, repurposed the building for their own use. Some rooms became offices for the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, the Nazi unit in charge of cataloging and controlling Europe's cultural loot. Meanwhile, The hidden masterpieces kept moving around the French countryside to dodge. Museum staff risked their lives to protect what they called the treasure. Some even joined the resistance. Others faked documents, forged transport orders, or straight up tricked collaborators. The Louvre, though silent, was anything but passive. It became a battlefield for culture by 1944 as the Allies closed in. The Nazis started retreating and looting. The French resistance worked tirelessly to keep the hidden collections from being stolen. When Paris was finally liberated in August, the museum guards stepped out of the shadows, and the Louvre slowly reclaimed its treasures. One by one, great works returned home. Some had suffered, others lucked out from destruction. But the Louvre endured beyond the war, not just as a building, but as a spirit. And in its quiet halls, you can still feel the weight of what nearly got lost. By the end of the 20th century, the Louvre had become one of the most respected museums in the world, guarding civilization's greatest treasures. But beneath that grandeur, signs of strain were showing: crowded galleries, outdated entrances, confusing layouts. The museum needed a serious makeover, and in 1981, French President François Mitterrand unveiled the Louvre's most ambitious modernization project ever. At the heart of it would be a glass pyramid designed by a Chinese-American architect. The project was bold, radical, and instantly divisive. The idea of plopping a massive modern steel and glass pyramid right in the historic Louvre courtyard shocked all of France. Critics called it a scar on French heritage. One notorious newspaper labeled it an abomination, threatening to pollute the soul of Paris. But the pyramid stayed cool. Its creator believed the geometrically perfect, transparent pyramid would complement the Louvre's classical beauty, not compete with it. More importantly, it would serve a practical purpose, acting as a grand central entrance, uniting the museum's sprawling sections. Construction kicked off in 1984, turning the area into a noisy, scaffold-filled battleground for years. Parisians grumbled, tourists got lost, and the press never stopped debating. But when the pyramid finally debuted in 1989, surprise opinions started to shift. Beneath its sleek exterior, the new underground lobby was efficient, elegant, and flooded with natural light. For the first time, visitors could actually navigate the museum with ease. The pyramid became a beacon, literally and symbolically, signaling the Louvre's openness to the future. Today, it's almost impossible to imagine the Louvre without it. The glass structure is iconic, popping up in movies, books, and photos worldwide. What was once mocked as architectural heresy is now hailed as visionary design. The pyramid didn't just modernize the museum, it reminded the world that the Louvre is always evolving from fortress to palace, palace to museum, past to present, and as usual, beneath its elegance, controversy still whispers just like it always has. Alongside beauty and grandeur, the Louvre hides shadows, tales of stolen treasures, missing masterpieces, and unsolved mysteries. As the museum grew in size and prestige, its collection did too. But not all pieces arrived honestly. Palace to museum, from past to present, and, as usual, beneath its polished surface, whispers of controversy lingered like old ghosts. Alongside beauty and grandeur. The Louvre hides shadows, tales of stolen treasures, missing masterpieces, and unsolved mysteries. As the museum grew in size and prestige, so did its collection, but not all art arrived honestly. Some of the first pieces came from confiscations. During the French Revolution, art was ripped from churches and noble estates. Under Napoleon's campaigns, looting became systematic. His armies swept through Europe and North Africa, stripping palaces and temples of statues, coffins, and paintings. Many of these artifacts proudly displayed in the Louvre, renamed the Museum Napoleon, as trophies of empire. Some were returned after his fall, but plenty stayed put. Today, debates like trophies from an empire. Some were returned after his fall, but plenty still hang around. To this day, debates rage on about who actually owns some of the museum's most priceless stuff. Greece has long demanded some artifacts back. Egypt has pushed hard to reclaim statues taken during colonial digs. The Louvre's Egyptian collection, one of the largest outside Cairo, remains both a pride and a quiet controversy. But the thefts didn't stop in the 19th century. In 1911, the Louvre suffered its most notorious heist. The Mona Lisa's, yes, that. Mona Lisa vanished from the wall. At first, no one noticed. The painting was modestly displayed, and when it disappeared, staff just figured it had been taken away for cleaning. It wasn't until the next day that panic set in. Investigations were chaotic. Even Picasso got questioned. But the real thief was Vincenzo Peruggia, an Italian handyman who thought the painting belonged back in Italy. He hid overnight inside the museum, stuffed the painting under his coat, and walked out the next morning. It took 2 years to recover the masterpiece, found in Florence, but there were other losses, too. Some minor, some brutal. A royal crown vanished in the 19th century. An invaluable Egyptian clock was damaged during shipping. Some artworks looted during Nazi occupation never made it back to their rightful owners. The Louvre, like all big institutions, carries the heavy baggage of its past, glorious and flawed. Every masterpiece on the wall bears the mark of human hands, choices, and consequences. Some treasures shine brightly in the spotlight. Others lurk quietly in the cracks of history. Today, the Louvre is more than just a museum. It's a living creature, constantly evolving, shaped by centuries of ambition, conquest, revolution, and reinvention. Over 10 million visitors stroll through its 650,000 plus square feet of galleries annually, gazing at faces frozen in oil, marble, and time. But the magic of the Louvre isn't just in its masterpieces, it's in the weight of history, the layers of eras beneath the floors and behind the walls. Every step through the museum is a journey across centuries, where medieval stone corridors sit just beneath neoclassical facades, and digital screens share space with ancient relics. In this paradoxical palace, Renaissance paintings hang under LED lights, while Egyptian mummies snooze under the Parisian sky. What makes the Louvre truly remarkable is that it never stands still. New wings open, old collections get a makeover. Temporary exhibits bring contemporary voices into a conversation with history. In 2012, The museum unveiled a new Islamic art department under a shining golden dome, an impressive blend of ancient tradition and modern design. But the Louvre's reach goes beyond its walls. In 2017, the Louvre Abu Dhabi opened, marking a cultural partnership between France and the United Arab Emirates. Its architecture mirrors the light and shadows of the original, but with a global vision. Artworks from around the world are displayed side by side, unrestricted by national borders, telling stories that span continents and civilizations. Yet even with all this growth, the essence of the Louvre remains unchanged, a place where memory and imagination collide. Walk its halls late in the day, and you'll see more than tourists. You'll catch quiet moments, a kid staring deep into a statue's eyes, a student sketching a forgotten corner, an elderly couple holding hands before a painting, and beneath it all, below the glass pyramid, behind velvet ropes, beyond gallery lights, the shutters keep their secrets. From around the world displayed side by side, no borders to hold back stories spanning continents and civilizations. Yet despite all this growth, the Louvre's essence hasn't changed. It's where memory and imagination collide. Walk its halls at the end of the day, and you'll see more than tourists. You'll catch quiet moments, a kid staring deep into a statue's eyes, a student sketching a forgotten corner, an elderly couple holding hands before a painting, and beneath it all, beneath the glass pyramid, behind velvet ropes, under gallery lights, the shutters keep their secrets, hidden staircases, secret rooms, and maybe somewhere in the silent dust of the oldest stones, the echo of a king or the whisper of a thief. The Louvre isn't just a museum, it's a palace of memory built on centuries of ambition and still writing its story. Here's the story: music. In the spring of 1974, just outside the ancient city of Xi'an in China's Shanxi province, a small group of farmers were digging a well during a drought. Outside the ancient city of Xi'an in Shanxi province, China, a small band of farmers were digging a well in the middle of a drought. It was creepy as hell, life-sized, hollow, yet eerily lifelike. The local authorities got wind of it, and archaeologists soon showed up to investigate. Little did they know, they were about to uncover one of the 20th century's most mind-blowing archaeological finds. As the digs expanded, the earth gave up more than anyone expected. Rows of clay soldiers emerged from the ground, thousands of them, standing in perfect military formation, frozen in time for over 2,000 years. Each one was unique, different hairstyles, armor styles, facial expressions. Not a single pair looked alike. Some stood tall with commanding presence, others crouched as if ready to attack, and they weren't alone. Accompanying them were clay horses, wooden chariots, and bronze weapons, all crafted with jaw-dropping realism. What on earth had been guarded underground for so long? The answer lay just beneath an unexcavated mound towering over 250 feet high, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. He was the one who ordered this massive underground army built, not for battlefield glory, but for the afterlife. The terracotta army was part of a vast necropolis, an empire buried beneath the earth, designed to mirror the emperor's real-life domain. Scholars estimate over 700,000 workers toiled on this project for nearly 4 decades, and amazingly, this colossal wonder remained intact and forgotten for over 2,000 years. News about the discovery spread like wildfire, captivating the whole world. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a window into ancient Chinese philosophy, art, power, and belief. A civilization that poured all its talent and resources into prepping one guy for eternity. With an army that never breathes but always stands guard. But the mystery was just getting started. Who made these soldiers? How were they crafted with such insane detail? And what secrets remain buried with them beneath the emperor's tomb? At the heart of the terracotta army was the vision of one man, a ruler whose ambition was only matched by his fear of death, Qin Shi Huang. Born in 259 BC, rose from prince to king, and finally became the first emperor of China. He united warring states under one flag, standardized currency, language, even axle lengths for carts. But while his power shaped a nation, it was his obsession with the afterlife that shaped the underground empire he left behind from a young age. Qin Shi Huang was haunted by thoughts of death. Though he ruled with an iron fist and achieved what no one else did, unifying China, he still couldn't beat the Grim Reaper. Ancient texts describe his relentless quest for immortality, expeditions sent hunting for elixirs of life, meetings with mystics, consultations with alchemists. They say he drank strange potions containing mercury, ironically, the same poison thought to grant eternal life. But while immortality and the flesh eluded him, Qin Shi Huang made sure he would reign forever in spirit by the time he declared himself emperor in 221 BC. Construction on his tomb had already begun, an enormous project that took nearly 4 decades to complete. Unlike traditional tombs filled with burial goods and ritual items, Qin Shi Huang envisioned an underground kingdom that wasn't just a symbol of power, but power itself: soldiers, officials, entertainers, and even a river of mercury to mimic. The geography of his empire. The terracotta army was meant to be his eternal bodyguard, soldiers. Since immortality was out of reach, Qin Shi Huang made sure he'd rule forever, at least spiritually, when he crowned himself emperor in 221 BC. Construction on his tomb began. It was such a massive project, it took nearly 4 decades to finish. Unlike traditional tombs filled with trinkets and ritual stuff, Qin Shi Huang dreamed of an underground kingdom, not just as a symbol of power, but power itself: an army, officials, entertainers, and even mercury rivers to mimic. The geography of his empire. This terracotta army was supposed to be his eternal bodyguard, soldiers protecting him in the afterlife, just like they did in real life. But these aren't your average clay statues. They're masterpieces, crafted with obsessive realism. Their poses and weapons reflect rank and actual military formations. This isn't just a bragging monument. It's a response to fear, the fear of dying alone, wandering hell, defenseless and without dignity. For Qin Shi Huang, eternity required preparation, and he would command. Ironically, his quest for eternal life might have sped up his death. The mercury-laced elixirs he drank probably poisoned him. He died in 210 BC at just 49, still chasing. The secret to cheating time. But somehow, he succeeded. His body gazed, but his army stood tall. The terracotta army impresses not just because it's huge, it's the precision, personality, and artistry packed into each soldier that blows archaeologists and historians away. When we say thousands of soldiers, we don't mean cookie-cutter copies. Each one is unique, frozen mid-step, mid-thought, mid-breath. The army is split into squads with different roles. The biggest pit stretches over 750 feet and holds infantry units in battle-ready formation, rows of archers, foot soldiers, and charioteers stand rigid in military order, just like back when Qin Shi Huang ruled. Pit 2 houses cavalry and chariots, a more elite force. Pit 3 is the command center, where top officers and military planners worked. It hints at a real chain of command, not just a symbolic army. The level of detail is mind-blowing. Personalized faces, no two noses, eyebrows, or cheekbones are alike. Some have broad jaws and curled lips. Others look grumpy or petty. Hairstyles show rank and regional origin. Armor is crafted in overlapping layers, complete with rivets and clasps. Some statues, even once, held real bronze weapon spears, swords, and crossbows. Many are still sharp and functional after 2 millennia underground. And it wasn't just sculptors. Behind this, teams of artisans, painters, blacksmiths, mold makers, and engineers all pitched in. After assembly, each warrior was painted in bright colors: red, blue, green, even lavender. These pigments faded fast when exposed to air, which is why most statues today look like plain brown clay. But imaging tech has revealed their original vividness, showing just how lifelike and vibrant the army once was. Some scholars think this level of sophistication shows tight central planning, maybe with military blueprints and social registers guiding the design. This isn't art for art's sake. It's a purposeful vision, logistical, state-funded, and executed with serious resources. The terracotta army wasn't made just to look like soldiers. It was made to be soldiers. Each statue is a clay soul created to serve their emperor forever, and beneath the silent earth, they've been standing guard ever since. The creation of the terracotta army wasn't the work of a few artists in a royal workshop. It was a massive state-sponsored effort spanning decades and involving the whole society. Ancient records say over 700,000 workers were drafted to build Emperor Qin's mausoleum complex, including the mighty underground army beside him. But who were these builders, craftsmen? Sure, sculptors, blacksmiths, potters, and engineers, but also conscripted laborers, peasants, prisoners, and even slaves. Some were skilled artisans trained at workshops across the empire. Others were political prisoners and forced laborers under imperial orders. Many never went home. According to historical texts, workers on the tomb were often executed or sealed inside the complex when the job was done. To keep the secret safe, archaeologists have found remains of kilns near the site, suggesting many statues were fired on the spot. The clay came from local sources, shaped in parts, then assembled like giant puzzles. The bodies were mass produced with molds, but the heads, the most expressive parts, were hand sculpted. This allowed for a wide range of features, giving a realism that no other ancient statue army could match. But the story isn't just about the statues. The workforce also dug out an entire underground city. Besides warriors, they built rooms packed with bronze statues, chariots, performers, musicians, and officials, all designed to serve the emperor in the afterlife. The tomb complex stretches over 50 kilometers and includes man-made rivers, a starry ceiling, and booby-trapped corridors that could kill any tomb raider, according to historian Sima Qian, writing a century after Emperor Qin's death. The emperor ordered the tomb ceiling to be decorated with rare jewels to mimic stars and a flowing Mercury River to recreate China's geography. Soil samples from the site actually show unusually high mercury levels, proving these legends have a kernel of truth. The empire builders worked in secret and under constant watch. Their legacy was buried in silence. Most of their names are lost, but their hands crafted one of the greatest wonders of ancient engineering, a whole kingdom buried not to be forgotten, but to last forever. At the heart of the terracotta army lies a large, tree-covered mound, just a hill like any other from and far, but beneath it is the unopened tomb of Emperor Qin himself, untouched for over 2,000 years. One of archaeology's biggest mysteries, still hidden just beneath the surface. Historical records, especially from the Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian, describe this tomb as another world entirely. He claimed inside are replicas of palaces and towers, precious artifacts, a flowing Mercury River symbolizing China's major waterways, and a pearl-studded ceiling mimicking the night sky. Crossbows supposedly had automatic triggers, ready to shoot any intruder bold enough to enter. Buried universe created entirely for one man's afterlife, but no one has opened it yet. Unlike the terracotta warriors, which have been studied and preserved extensively since discovery, the main burial chamber remains sealed, while the reasons are practical and ethical. First off, the technology needed to excavate the tomb without destroying its contents just doesn't exist yet. Archaeologists worry that once opened, priceless artifacts including fragile paintings, textiles, or organic materials could be ruined when exposed to air. The terracotta warriors themselves lost their vibrant paint within hours of excavation, fading from colorful figures to dull clay. Then there's the mercury problem. Soil tests around the mound show high mercury levels, backing up the ancient texts. If true, the tomb could pose serious environmental and health risks. Some speculate that the tomb was deliberately rigged to stop grave robbers with traps and poisonous fumes lurking in the dark. Culturally, respect is key, according to traditional Chinese beliefs. Disturbing the dead, especially an emperor, is a serious taboo. Many believe the tomb shouldn't be touched unless it can be entered with absolute respect and preservation. Oh, so it waits. Beneath that quiet hill lies a secret unseen for over 2,000 years. A world built for a man who couldn't beat death, but could craft a paradise to rule it. And as science advances, the question becomes clearer: should we open the tomb of the first emperor? The terracotta warriors aren't just statues, they're soldiers, and like any soldier, they were armed for war. Many warriors once held real weapons, swords, spears, bows, crossbows, and arrows. These weapons weren't just decoration, they were deadly precise tools. This isn't some symbolic craft project. These are war tools buried in clay hands as part of a full military simulation. Weapons weren't just decoration, they actually worked, forged with deadly precision. This wasn't some symbolic craft. These were real war tools buried in clay hands as part of a full-on military simulation. For the afterlife, when archaeologists first dug up the pits, they found thousands of bronze weapons buried with the statues' razor-sharp swords. Arrowheads designed to fly far and pierce armor. Even crossbows made with clever mechanical designs, despite being over 2,000 years old. Many of these weapons are still in pretty good shape. Some blades are still sharp. Their bronze alloys evolved enough to resist corrosion for millennia. How did they pull that off? Recent studies show ancient Chinese blacksmiths coated many weapons with a thin layer of chromium oxide, basically a rust-proofing technique. Not reinvented until the 20th century, but Qin dynasty artisans had this down cold. Their metallurgy was way ahead of its time, proving a highly organized society with advanced tech skills. But weapons served a deeper purpose. Qin Shi Huang didn't just want a pretend army, he wanted a deadly one. These warriors were tasked to fight threats in the afterlife, just like his real army fought conquests. This wasn't a peaceful afterlife fantasy, it was preparation. The emperor intended to rule dead as he did alive by force, strategy, and means to dominate. Interestingly, many weapons went missing when modern archaeologists uncovered the site. It's believed that shortly after the emperor died, the tomb was raided or sabotaged by rebellious workers or enemies of the regime. Fires broke out, roofs collapsed, and weapons were stolen, even in death. Qin's empire faced rebellion, but enough remained to paint a vivid picture: a silent army, armed and alert, standing in formation, underground, each soldier ready to march not in this world, but the next. While the terracotta warriors are the most famous part of Qin Shi Huang's tomb complex, they're not the only statues created. Alongside the battle-ready soldiers is a diverse cast of characters. Complete miniature society crafted from clay, all designed to serve the emperor in his eternal kingdom. Archaeologists have unearthed statues of musicians, dancers, acrobats, and strongmen, each sculpted with the same meticulous detail as the warriors, though their roles are very different. Instead of armor, they wear robes. Instead of weapons, they hold Instruments or strike performance poses. These are the entertainers of the afterlife. Created musical instruments or striking a pose mid-performance. These are the entertainers of the afterlife. Crafted to amuse and please the ruler, who wanted his underworld to be just as lively as the world above. Officials and court servants were buried nearby, recognizable by their fancy outfits and calm demeanor. They represented the emperor's bureaucracy, advisors, secretaries, governors all ready to keep order. Even after death, even the stable hands, cooks, and grooms are shown kneeling or hard at work, faces full of humble exhaustion. Then come the animals. Terracotta horses stand by, once painted, decorated wooden chariots. Underground stables reveal that not just sculptures, but actual sacrificed horses were part of the scene, might have been buried for the emperor's use. In other pits, bronze animals like cranes, geese, and ducks lined an artificial riverbed, showing Qin's urge to replicate even nature itself. Each find just added layers to the tomb's complexity. This wasn't just a military base, it was an underground empire, complete with court life, culture, and its own daily grind. Scholars think the plan was pretty clear. Emperor Qin Shi Huang wanted to recreate the world he conquered while alive and rule it forever after death. While the warriors stood silently on parade, these forgotten figures brought something softer, more human. They remind us the afterlife wasn't just endless war, it was full of music, rituals, and the constant hustle of a royal palace. They might not have swords or armor, but they were made to serve the first emperor and have waited in the dark for over 2,000 years. This terracotta army isn't just an archaeological wonder, it's a mirror of an empire at its peak. Each clay statue reflects the scale, ambition, and structure of a unified China under Qin Shi Huang. His dynasty lasted just 15 years, but its legacy reshaped the country. Nowhere is that transformation recorded more hauntingly than in the emperor's underground army. Before Qin, China was a fragmented land of warring states. 7 major kingdoms constantly fought for dominance. Qin, the westernmost state, was seen by some as a cultural outsider, but it had something the others lacked: ruthless efficiency. Under Qin Shi Huang, legal policies tightened, roads standardized, the writing system unified, and the foundation for the Great Wall began. The terracotta army reflects that same structure and discipline. Soldiers arranged in precise formations, officers up front, infantry behind, archers on the flanks. Even the numbers varied by region, as if modeled on real troops drafted from across the empire. This was more than tomb guarding. It was about representing the machinery of state. In many ways, the army is a frozen moment, a still portrait of Qin's power at its height, but it's also a cautionary tale because despite all its achievements, Qin Shi Huang's reign was terrifying. He burned books, outlawed dissent, and executed opponents. His obsession with control lasted even into death, and the monument built to celebrate his immortality quietly witnessed the fall of his dynasty. Just 3 years after he died, the Qin Empire collapsed, rebellions broke out. His tomb was stormed. His son committed suicide, and the Han dynasty rose to replace it. Burying Qin's feared legacy, literally and politically beneath centuries of dust. But then, centuries later, those silent warriors re-emerged. Today, they don't just speak of one man's fear of death, but of a civilization's vast reach and relentless ambition. The Terracotta Army isn't just a tribute to an emperor dreaming of ruling the afterlife. It's a timeless echo of the moment. All of China bowed before a throne. The Terracotta Army still stands silent, line after line, decade after decade, century after century. They watch and wait not for war, not for conquest, but to remember. They are not just tomb guards, but sentinels of the moment humans believed they could take the whole world with them after death. Emperor Qin Shi Huang dreamed of immortality. He unified warring states, rebuilt the country, and spent his final years preparing for the life. The emperor dreamed of immortality. He united warring nations, rebuilt the land, and spent his last years prepping for the afterlife, where he could still rule. He wasn't into symbolic offerings or fancy rituals. He built an underground empire, complete with soldiers, weapons, and order just like above ground. And centuries passed. Earthquakes shook the earth. Dynasties rose and fell. But his creation endured. Beneath layers of dirt and silence, the warriors wait. They bear the weight of time on cracked shoulders and faded paint. But their presence never fades. Today, after more than 2,000 years, they're no longer buried. They stand under museum lights, beneath protective trees, and under curious gazes. But their mission hasn't changed. They're still watching, still guarding, and maybe still waiting for their emperor to rise. The Terracotta Army is one of the few places on Earth where the line between life and death feels paper thin, where stone seems to remember walking among them isn't like touring an exhibit. It's like stepping into a paused kingdom, a theater where the curtain never rises. But the actors are always ready. Archaeologists keep uncovering new figures, new rooms, and new secrets. Each layer reveals more about the emperor's vision and his fears, because no matter how mighty, Qin Shi Huang couldn't cheat death, but in building something meant to last forever, he created a legacy that defies time. The terracotta warriors weren't made for display, but now they've become a world treasure, not just relics of ancient China, but a reminder of the dream of immortality. They don't stand to fight battles anymore, but to witness the man who tried to take it all with him. And somehow, maybe he succeeded more than we think, long before scripts were written or stages built. The origins of theater in ancient Greece were rooted in religion. Those festivals weren't born for fun, but as rituals, sacred offerings to the gods, especially Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and magical transformations. To get theater's roots, imagine hillsides, wide open skies, and communities gathering not to watch shows, but to connect. In the early days, people didn't watch performances, they were the performance. Rural festivals honoring Dionysus involved drinking, dancing, music, and ecstatic celebrations. But at the heart of these gatherings was the dithyramb. These wild, frenzied hymns were sung by a chorus of 50 men or boys, not your average sing-along. The singers moved in sync, swaying and singing, begging the gods to show up. It was a ritual meant to transport, connecting humans with the divine through rhythm, voice, and movement. Over time, dithyrambs got more structured. The hymns started weaving stories, births, adventures, suffering, and joy of Dionysus. As stories grew complex, a performer broke away from the chorus. This solo voice joined in dialogue with the group, creating tension, emotion, and the earliest form of dramatic exchange. This innovation is often credited to Thespis in the 6th century BCE. He's considered the first to step out from the chorus and take on a separate character. By doing so, Thespis turned ritual into drama. He didn't just sing about a god, he became the god, hero, or mortal stuck in conflict. From then on, theater began breaking from religious tradition and became its own thing. A story told with her characters, emotions, and conflict. But early Greek theater still couldn't fully ditch the worship ritual. The stage was sacred ground. The audience wasn't just entertained, they participated in a collective act of reverence, purification, and transformation. Early theater wasn't about fame or art. It was a divine mirror, where gods spoke through human voices and humans danced on the edge of mystery. By the 6th century BCE, Athens was evolving from a humble city-state into a cultural powerhouse, and at the heart of this artistic explosion was the city's Dionysia festival, which later became the cradle of Western drama, held every spring to honor Dionysus Eleutherius. This festival mixed piety with a spectacular scene. This event stretched over several days, and during that time, Athens transformed. The streets flooded with music, wine flowed freely, and the city hit pause on all its usual business. Locals, foreigners, politicians, and regular folks all joined in. It was more than just a party. It was civic unity where religion, politics, and art collided. The highlight of Dionysia was the theater competition. Tragedy artists performed 3 tragedies and a satyr play for the judges. These performances were no casual neighborhood shows. They took place in massive open-air theaters built into hillsides, packed with thousands of spectators. Playwrights competed for fame, but also to honor the gods. Winning at Dionysia wasn't just bragging rights, it was a sacred offering. The show kicked off at dawn and ran all day long. Each trilogy explored themes like human suffering, divine justice, fate, and morality. The audience sat in a semicircle, watching masked actors in elaborate robes perform stories about gods, kings, and doomed heroes. These tales were familiar, pulled from mythology, but retold in ways that hit you right in the feels. The chorus still played a big role, narrating, commenting, and adding emotional resonance. Between scenes, they sang and danced, helping the crowd follow the drama. Music, movement, and dialogue came together to create something bigger than a play. It was a sacred experience, a group cleansing ritual. Even the state backed these events. The rich were expected to sponsor shows as a civic duty, and tickets were subsidized so even the poor could attend. This wasn't just art, it was democracy in action. The Dionysia City Festival turned performance into an institution. It gave structure to ritual chaos and made storytelling a mirror reflecting human weakness, divine wrath, and moral struggle. And through this sacred competition, theater was born. From songs and rituals came something darker, deeper, and more relentless tragedy. The word tragoidia means goat song, probably linked to ancient rituals where a goat was sacrificed to Dionysus. By the 5th century BCE, tragedy had evolved into the foundation of Athenian theater, a genre unlike anything the world had seen before. Greek tragedy wasn't just a sad story, it was a spiritual dissection, a journey into fate, guilt, honor, and the terrifying uncertainty of divine will. Inside the plays was a tragic hero, usually a noble character, wrestling with forces way bigger than himself. He might be a king, a warrior, or even a blessed mortal, but he always stumbles, crushed by a mistake, a choice, or an unavoidable encounter. The power of tragedy isn't just the downfall, it's the tension between human choice and cosmic fate. These plays forced audiences to ask, do we have free will? Or are we doomed? Is suffering random or deserved? Is anyone really free from the gods' whims? 3 playwrights emerged as pioneers of this genre: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus, the first of the 3, added a second actor to the stage, a breakthrough that allowed actual dialogue. His works were grand, solemn, and moral heavy. He saw divine justice as complex, often harsh, but ultimately restoring balance. Aeschylus's Orestia trilogy told of a family cursed by murder, revenge, and bloodshed, ending only when divine justice replaced personal vengeance. Sophocles pushed tragedy further by adding a third actor and deepening character complexity. His Oedipus Rex remains the quintessential tragedy guy, tries to outrun fate, but crashes headfirst into it. Random chance or divine justice? Can anyone really escape the god's will? 3 playwrights rose as pioneers of this genre: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus, the first of the trio, added a second actor to the stage, a game changer allowing actual dialogue. His plays were grand, solemn, and full of moral weight. He saw the gods' justice as complex, often harsh, but ultimately restoring balance. Aeschylus's Orestia trilogy tells of a family cursed by murder, revenge, and bloodshed, ending only when divine justice replaces personal vengeance. Sophocles pushed tragedy further by adding a third actor and deepening character complexity. His Oedipus Rex remains the ultimate tragedy, a man desperately trying to dodge fate, only to run headfirst into it. Sophocles portrayed his characters with more humanity, showing their inner conflicts, pride, and helplessness. Euripides, the most controversial, steered the genre toward realism. His characters were rough around the edges, flawed, and unpredictable. He questioned the gods, spotlighted women's suffering and the oppressed, making tragedy more personal and painful. Through tragedy, Greek theater became a moral arena, less a show, more a showdown. The audience didn't stroll out happy. Nope. They left stunned, dazed, and hurting. Because tragedy wasn't just about a hero's downfall. It showed how fragile every human effort really is, and reminded everyone that suffering is universal. No one's getting off the hook, while tragedy dug into fate's darkness and divine weight. Comedy popped up as its wild, rebellious, noisy, and often scandalous twin, while tragedy sought release through pain. Comedy delivered it through laughter, a crucial balance, to counter life's heaviness and the rituals of Athens. Greek comedy, like tragedy, was born from religious festivals, especially Dionysia and Lenaea, another winter bash for Dionysus. Early on, comedy was chaotic and filthy, packed with crude jokes, parodies, and mocking songs aimed at politicians, philosophers, and even the gods themselves. But this wasn't meaningless silliness. Greek comedy was sharp satire and bold political commentary. The first and most famous playwright of this style was Aristophanes, the master of what we now call classical comedy. His plays were full of fantasy, absurdity, and direct attacks on public figures in the clouds. He roasted Socrates as a dumb sophist. In Lysistrata, he imagined women ending war by simply refusing to get cozy with their husbands. And in The Frogs, he sent Dionysus himself to the underworld to judge a contest between dead tragedians. Aristophanes' plays often broke the fourth wall. The chorus would face the audience and deliver a parabasis, a direct speech, blurring the lines between story and public rant. Nothing was off limits. War, corruption, philosophy, even theater competitions were fair game for ridicule. But behind the witty jokes and surreal plots, Greek comedy had a deeper job. It was a place where society could laugh at itself, speak truth to power, and explore taboo topics in a communal setting. In a democracy like Athens, where public opinion was king, comedy was a pressure valve, a collective stress relief. As Athens evolved, so did comedy. By the late 4th century BCE, the rise of new comedy brought to subtler stories, focused more on characters. Playwrights like Menander shifted attention from gods and politics to family, love, and everyday life. These comedies later influenced Roman writers like Plautus and Terence, and eventually modern sitcoms. Greek comedy showed joy, frustration, and rebellion. It proved that in a world grappling with war, death, and fate, laughter wasn't escapism, it was survival, and just like tragedy exposed human downfall, comedy celebrated human foolishness, fun, flawed, and defiantly alive. Ancient Greek theater wasn't just a place for performances, it was a sacred space, both religious and civic, where the community gathered not just for entertainment, but transformation. Shows didn't happen in bland buildings. They took place in massive outdoor arenas carved into hillsides, always facing nature, the sky above, the sea, or the distant city, far away, with the gods watching from above. The most famous of these was the Theater of Dionysus in Athens, perched on the southern slope of the Acropolis. The stadium could hold up to 17,000 spectators, citizens, medics, foreigners, and tourists alike, from marble seats. The audience could see and be seen. That mattered. Going to the theater was a public act, a civic duty, and a ritual all rolled into one. The heart of the theater was the orchestra, a circular dance floor far away. The gods watched from above. The most famous spot, the Dionysus Theater in Athens, perched on the south slope of the Acropolis. This stadium could hold up to 17,000 spectators, citizens, medical staff, foreigners, and tourists alike. From those marble tiers, the audience could see and be seen. That mattered. Going to the theater was a public act, a civic duty, and a ritual all rolled into one. At the center was the orchestra, a circular dance floor where the chorus sang and moved. Behind it stood the skene, a building serving as backdrop, dressing room, and symbol of place-palace, temple, or battlefield. Actors performed on a raised platform called the proscenium, with a sacred altar to Dionysus behind them. Every play was performed to honor him. But what truly made the theater sacred wasn't just the structure, it was the purpose. Theater was a communal experience, designed to stir souls so the audience could confront their fears, beliefs, and responsibilities. Watching kings fall or fools win, the crowd wasn't just spectators. They were part of an emotional cleansing ritual through pity and fear. The festival kicked off with sacrifices and a grand parade. The statue of Dionysus was carried through the city. The playwrights weren't just artists, they were competing priests, offering their stories as sacred acts, and the audience. They were witnesses to something divine happening through the human voice. The connection between the sacred and civic life was strong. Political leaders, generals, and jurors sat front row. Democracy and drama shared the same stage. In the theater, Athenians faced their myths, morals, and mortality together. Greek theater wasn't just actors and applause. It was a temple of human fate, where every laugh, gasp, and tear was a prayer to gods of chaos, wisdom, and destiny. In ancient Greek theaters, where thousands gathered outdoors with zero microphones. How did an actor grab attention? The answer was performance art, a combo of masks, movement, and sound transformed people into legendary characters, delivering emotions and personality across a massive space. At the heart of this transformation was the mask, made from lightweight materials like linen, cork, or wood. The mask covered the entire face, usually with exaggerated expressions, a wide-open mouth for sadness, a furrowed brow for anger, a crooked smile for mischief. Each design amped up the character's emotional tone, since only a handful of actors played multiple roles. Masks also let them switch identities on the fly. 1 minute a king, next a god or a slave. Masks weren't just practical, they were sacred tools linking the actor to the spirit of the role. Wearing the mask wasn't just pretending, it was embodying. The actor became a vessel, delivering not just personality but fate, myth, and message. Costumes mattered too. Bright, stylized cloaks helped mark roles royalty, warrior, servant, or fool. High-soled shoes called cothurnus boosted tragic actors, making them look taller and more otherworldly. Meanwhile, comic actors wore padded suits and weird masks, exaggerating bellies, butts, and facial features for laughs. The movement was grand and deliberate. No close-ups or subtle lines needed. Actors used big gestures and choreographed steps to show emotion. Every pose mattered. Every step carried weight, followed by sound. The chorus, arranged in the orchestra pit, sang and chanted in unison, creating a rhythmic, nearly hypnotic storytelling layer. Flutes accompanied the action, boosting suspense, sadness, or victory. The human voice, trained and projected, echoed across stone benches and marble floors. Masks, costumes, movement, and sound combined into a ritualistic performance language. It wasn't realism, but essence distilling human experience into bold symbolic action. In Greek theater, the actor wasn't the star, but a servant of the story, shaped by myth, driven by voice, and hidden behind the haunting power of the mask. Every ancient Greek play had a chorus, not main actors, nor passive audience, but somewhere in the middle. They didn't just watch the story unfold. They sang, danced, questioned, and mourned it. The chorus was the soul of the show, a bridge between mortal and divine, stage and crowd. Traditionally, the chorus had 12 to 15 members for tragedy and 24 for comedy, performing in the orchestra pit, the circular dance floor at the foot of the stage. Their movements were carefully choreographed, and their songs, called odes or stasima, these were composed to the tune of the aulos, a double flute that gave the music a weirdly haunting vibe. But what did the chorus actually do? They commented on the action, tossed out some moral questions, and voiced thoughts the characters couldn't say out loud. If the hero made a deadly choice, the chorus might quietly express doubt. If a god showed up, the chorus would interpret what it meant. They basically mirrored the audience's reactions: fear, pity, rage, surprise, but with poetic rhythm that bumped those feelings up to near divine levels. Sometimes, the chorus was like a collective conscience. In Oedipus Rex, they begged the king to hear reason, sensing doom before it crashed down. In Antigone, they wrestled with choosing between law and justice. In Bacchus's plays, they represented the wild, ecstatic, dangerous, and fiercely loyal followers of Dionysus. Their job wasn't always serious, though in comedies, the chorus could get loud, rude, and totally inappropriate. They might interrupt the plot, mock the audience, or even deliver a parabasis, a direct speech to the crowd, often airing the playwright's political or social views. What made the chorus powerful wasn't just what they said, but how they said it voices and movements all in sync. They were a living metaphor, a bunch speaking as one, reflecting not just personal opinions, but the group's identity in a world ruled by fate and gods. The chorus reminded the audience of their place in the grand design. They were witnesses, questioners, and the voice for the voiceless. In Athens, the birthplace of both theater and democracy, drama wasn't just art, it was a civic institution. The theater was where the city gathered not just to watch myths and legends, but to face itself, its values, fears, and failures. It was a space where storytelling and civic spirit blended seamlessly. Annual festivals, especially the Dionysia, were state-sponsored and heavily attended. Wealthy citizens called shorigoi were appointed to fund productions as a kind of public service. The best plays were picked by judges, performed before thousands, and judged by a citizen jury. This process was official, competitive, and pure Athenian. Why does this matter? Because the stories on stage never just talked about ancient heroes or distant gods. They reflected the present, offering metaphors for morality and politics, mirroring the city itself. When Sophocles staged Antigone, he wasn't just telling a myth about a stubborn king. He was asking his fellow Athenians, when does law serve justice? And when does it become tyranny? When Euripides wrote about war-torn women in The Women of Troy, he was referring to the recent destruction caused by Athens' military campaigns. Even comedy was political. Aristophanes roasted leaders, questioned war, and mocked philosophers. The audience laughed, but the questions lingered. Who are we watching? What are we becoming? Going to the theater wasn't a passive activity. People were expected to show up, think, and engage. The state often subsidized tickets, so even the poorest Athenians could attend. The message was clear. A healthy democracy demands an informed public, and the stage helped nurture that thinking. Plays didn't just entertain. They educated, provoked, united, and challenged. They turned myths into messages and the stage into political art. Every gasp, cheer, and silence carried societal weight in a city built on public voice. The theater was called the public's echo chamber, a place where free thought mingled with sacred myth, and every citizen wasn't just a spectator, but a participant in the polis's moral life. Though the golden age of Greek theater faded, where you weren't just a spectator, you were part of the polis's moral life. Though Greece's theatrical golden age faded with the fall of classical Athens, its legacy never died. What started as a ritual evolved into tragedy and comedy that echoed through millennia, laying the foundation for Western storytelling. After the Peloponnesian War and Macedonia's rise, Athenian theater lost political clout but remained a cultural powerhouse. Atheist playwrights like Menander shifted focus from gods and fate to everyday life, romantic mix-ups, identity confusions, and family drama. These new comedies later inspired Roman playwrights like Plautus and Terence, whose plays laid the groundwork for Renaissance and modern comedy. Roman theater borrowed a lot from the Greek structure, characters, even language, but The deeper influence stuck around through the ages, when Shakespeare wrote tragic heroes ruined by their flaws, or when Molière roasted society with sharp wit. The spirit of Sophocles and Aristophanes came back to life. Up to today, echoes of ancient Greek drama are everywhere. The three-act structure popular in modern storytelling mirrors Greek tragedy's progression. Aristotle's idea of catharsis is still the emotional core of powerful stories. That deep emotional release we feel when a story hits our own struggles and conflicts. The architecture of modern theaters. The use of masks in performance. Even the chorus concept in musicals all trace back to those outdoor amphitheaters built on the hills of ancient Greece. But maybe the biggest legacy isn't the structure, it's the purpose. Greek theater asked questions we're still stuck on. What's justice? What's fate? What does it even mean to be human in a world ruled by forces beyond our control? It shows grief, joy, defiance, and absurdity. It reminds folks that power must bow to truth, and laughter can be as revolutionary as rage. What started as drunken songs to the god of wine turned into a timeless art form, one that still lights up our lives. What began as drunken hymns to the god of wine became a timeless art form, one thing that still lights up our lives. Not with easy answers, but with stories brave enough to ask the hardest questions. The stage may have changed, but these voices, it might be new, sure, but drama, conflict, and surprise, those are forever.